So I'm going to talk to you about, with a few slides, just giving you an intimate coverage into my studio and the spaces I've worked in the last 15 months. And it comes at a really relevant time because I'm at the cusp of working in a studio at West Dean next week, which will be my first major workshop outside of my own workspace in a live space under social distancing measures. And it's something I always find quite difficult to prepare for in normal circumstances, you know, get fright or flight, but I'm not certain how I'm going to respond to that. So this talk is actually going to look at how things might have changed, not just for me, for all of us, and what it's done to my creative input. So I'm just going to come into that. And hopefully the slideshow will list. Just give it a few seconds. It just takes a bit of time. And from current slide, it's just taking its time because it's, come on. It'll be there in a minute, folks. It just takes its time. That's all you need on a Saturday afternoon, isn't it? It's at the moment not allowing me to go in, so we might just have to start that again. It's not allowing me to go into the slideshow, folks.
Okay, let's work out what's going on.
Yeah, I'm going to stop the share and try again. Let me just try that again. Sorry, folks, we will be there. Don't you love technology, everybody? Okay, so this is an image, obviously, of me in my studio. And it's a little place I have in the garden. And during the week, I had a message in response to something I'd put out. And that's really relevant, I always say, in response to something I'd put out. A lot of our lives have been shared through a screen in the last 15 months, particularly in the UK. I haven't been in a classroom other than in my local centre, where I've been allowed to teach 6 people at a time at social distancing. And that's only been in the last month in itself. So this is a way that many of us had to learn to adapt and work. My partner came down the garden and took a photograph of me sitting at the table. And I just thought it really represented my need to be both outside, so the reflection of the outside space is there. This is the first lockdown. And also the way I'm concentrating on my own work, finding a new way of working. And I think that's what we all did. And part of that was that fright or flight. I felt like the blood had congealed in my veins because everything that I'd been planning, and I planned 2 to 3 years ahead, like many creative people, we have bookings, we have schedules, we have exhibitions, just literally disappeared before my eyes. And at that time, we didn't, you know, we had no understanding of how much impact it was had. We, you know, initially we thought it'd be 2 to 3 months, you know, not 15 months down the line. And we are still thinking about ways we manage. And I don't know what I'd have said to that person on the bicycle taking a photograph that you can see in the shadows. That is obviously me then, about what I know now. But what I've realized is that as a creative person, one of my strengths is my adaptability and my ability to seek a way of connecting to people. Yes, like everyone else, including the young man who's found a quiet time. This is about 6 o'clock in the morning this time last year, playing his guitar at the local park where I cycled every day during that first lockdown, still trying to make a connection to our creative centre, if you like. But literally many people saw that not just the industry start to collapse in on itself for a period of time, but their income. The bottom image is a view from my bedroom window of the park and the trees and the mist in the morning. And I think that was the thing that gave me initially solace. From someone who's out there working with people as part of my creative practice, I was suddenly on my own, and we were all suddenly on our own, and we had this need to communicate. So what was I going to make sense of? How was I responding? And I think taking a term, the first responder, I think my work became like a first responder. I didn't have time to digest. No one had time to digest. So I just took notes. I made creative notes. Some were grabbed when I was waiting, a lot of waiting in that first lockdown in the queues. So I always carried a sketchbook in my pocket, and I practiced my life drawings. I teach life drawing to students as part of my course. And I thought, well, I must keep up my practice in order to be able to teach when I go back. So I got into the habit of whiling away the hours. I'm certain people were thinking I was making notes, but I made life drawings in the queues. I would sit in the garden and look at the change in the plants around me and how the seasons change. And that's one thing that had changed radically for me last year. Is this the first year I've been able to look at and follow the seasons here at home. I normally don't follow the seasons here because I could be in Australia or Canada or the USA or France. You know, I spent most of my last 4 years traveling, and that's the nature. I'm nomad. I'm a nomad at home. I have a Romani ancestry. But there were things that were full of compassion, and at sometimes things that obviously made us a bit frustrated or angry. And one of them, I think, is quite clear on the left-hand side in some of my sketchbooks. There's a collage, and it's a flower bag. And that was within the first 2 weeks. I had been teaching, I hadn't stocked up, but nobody knew how quickly it was coming. I didn't even know that we were needing to go out and buy stuff. And I'd come home from work that day, intended to get bread, milk and tea because we needed some tea bags. I came away with a bunch of daffodils, and that's me with my backpack looking in at Sainsbury's with nothing on the shelves. And that was frightening. I think it was frightening for everybody. And what was doubly frightening was that I can manage what I can carry on a bicycle. I was mobile, but how was that immediately affecting before we had strategies and things in place and support? And thank heavens the community woke up and said, look, there are people out there who are more vulnerable. And that gave me hope that there is a kind of family of people around us that we may not have always had those connections with before this crisis, that suddenly, I think the best traditions came out and supported each other. Yeah, there were the odd few that were greedy or perhaps not careful. And I began to question about what my place was in all of this. What could I do? And somebody suggested I made some scrubs because I could sew. And I said, you know, by the time I've made one set of scrubs, it would be a waste of time. So one of the things, and they probably wouldn't be up to spec because I work improvisationally a lot. So one of the first things I did, and I still continue to do, is I have been teaching online. I've been teaching via Zoom. I started to teach with my local adult education centre online and gain confidence in doing that. Not as much teaching, and I've decided not to do as much as I've been offered, but I think it was important to make those connections. But certainly in those first few months, I set up some projects with partners, voluntary. I wasn't paid to do. I decided that one thing I could do that I think I would be good at doing, I didn't know if I made that assumption at the time. It's only in retrospect that one of my strengths is my ability to communicate and talk about how valuable a creative experience is for all of us as a means to give us of a diversion or a focus. So I worked with Westine to deliver a free workshop online, and with Textile Artists, which is a company that you can check out their website, but they have offers on different types of artists they're interested in, all within the creative textile field. And Westine is a local college. It's only just opened its doors up this June after 15 months of lockdown, part of the Edward James Foundation. And they asked many of their working artists if they would be willing to help with putting out some videos for the community at large. And that's one of the things I decided to do. But it also impacted upon how I mean, people know I'm resourceful with my materials, but how I worked with my materials. So I started to improvise and rework with some of my old pieces of cloth. Immediately before lockdown hit, this was my last exhibition 15 months ago. And it's ironic, it's that this was the last exhibition. This was an exhibition with Gypsy, called Gypsy Maker 4, and it was with the Romani Cultural and Arts Company. And the whole remit is to provide a platform for the creative industries within the Romani traveling and Gypsy community to be able to showcase their work and talk about the context of their work. And I was commissioned to make some work for this exhibition. So this was the last exhibition that I was involved with, which was intended to tour last year. And I think, you know, there's a great irony in the fact that an exhibition with its focus on the traveling community, was forced to move or shift its perspective and go online. And that took some time. It all took time in that early period. So this was the last time I was in the same space with people talking about my work. The gentleman on the right is one of the local MPs from Welsh Council, and the one with the glasses is Daniel Turner, who is the co-exhibitor of this two-person exhibition. So these are the pieces that were commissioned. They are centered around some of my own background and how those materials are representing different facets. So on the left, it's called Piedwagtail. They all have the kettle inside the piece. Inside the pieces, you can see the figurative element of the kettle. And I see them as being the contributing factors to the making of me, if you like. So the left is my great-grandparents, the photographic representation of them. I have the photographs in my collection. And most of the Romani community were thought to have come from Northwest India and travelled through migration to Europe. The central one is dedicated to my immediate grandmother, Mary Holmes, née Cunningham. Her family name was Cunningham, which means Koningsham, living in the castle. And I used roses because they grew in her garden, but there's also a close affinity with the theme of roses and castles, which you often see on barges as well as on caravans, the way that the traditional vardos and caravans were decorated. And that incorporates some of her cloth and some photographic prints that I've taken of roses and my own drawings. But the final image is the making of me, if you like. It's the first starting point of my ownership over where I was going. And that was my studies in Japan very early on in my career. And where I began to see that connection between paper and cloth, I began to look at early on in my career as a fine artist studying painting, the foundations of where my current practice lie. You know, for any artist who is involved with their work evolves over a long process of discovery. And it's not always certain. I always talk to my students about moving from uncertainty to some depth of certainty within your work, allowing things to evolve and come through. And the imagery for me is quite relevant. So these are close-ups. I like disparate materials, the fact that they have their own history and they can tell their own story. But at some point, there is an expression that will come through from that dialogue where the more figurative element is relevant, how I gather them and work with them. But all of my materials are gathered within my footsteps. Some are sent to me. Many I pick up when I'm in workshops, people will give them to me. I don't believe I've purchased any piece of material in the last 30 years. So these are handkerchiefs, again, repeating some of those images, but they all have a different name. I'll give you an example. One is Vardo, so that's the family beside the caravan. They're almost like signature pieces representing the nature of that family and my identity. And I think it's the first time that I've used my family as a reference and found that is an intermediate point of connection between how I identify my own history, how I work as an artist. And I've come to the conclusion that I'm not doing anything any different to my Romani family. built my career by traveling to places to work and sharing my skills. And that's an identification I have clearly with that root of my family. So in lockdown, this nomad has been stuck at home, and these are just a couple of the sketchbooks to show you how I kind of started to facilitate some of the visual connection I was making to the world. I can never shake off that element of drawing within my work, or those humble objects that we see as every day. And I think it's a kind of an expression, cock a snook, when I was told that you got involved with textiles because you can't draw. In fact, I'm actually saying I can draw. This is part of my vocabulary, and I think it's relevant to all artists to be able to find a way of connecting to the world by making their own drawings. It doesn't matter how you draw, but it encourages you to observe what's going on around you. So this is one of the first pieces that resulted from that long absorption. Greed laid bare, that's on a hospital gown. My neighbours gave me eggs over the wall and some bread and milk, so I didn't, and a few tea bags, so I didn't suffer too greatly that first weekend without being able to get any shopping. And then there's a tag there from an old pair of jeans. It says labour and wait. And I feel that 15 months we have been labouring and waiting. And during that time, my great-grandmother, Mary, has been looking on and guiding me, I think. I think the roots of my ancestry are stronger now than they have been in any other time in the way that I've begun to work. To such an extent that this is a piece that I created for our local hospital. People were asked to make portraits of the nurses and doctors, and I said I didn't want to make one for any particular nurse or doctor. I wanted to have an unidentified person, I know who it is, as a symbol of care, of the care services that providing the care we needed at that time. Daisies are there because they are a symbol of hope and of nurturing and motherhood. And the underlying thing that I learned is that we need to be kinder to each other. And there is a synergy with that. My grandmother, my great-grandmother, would have been out there 100 years ago during the great flu pandemic, with many women and particularly the Romani community offering their skills and their services to families in order to nurture them back to health. This is before we had the National Health Service, of course. So I'm currently working on a project that should have been put in place this year for Antwerp, city of Antwerp. This is just a little hint of it. You can see more information on my website, talking about the nature of how we are connected to the landscape around us, the nature of people and movement of people. I'm discovering a lot through doing this. It's not certain about how it will be put together yet. It's almost there. This is hanging in my small studio at the back. It's not with me at the moment. It's all rolled up neatly. But again, some of the stories that have been told and during this time are included in this piece, but also some things I overheard up to the period of lockdown and between the time of 2018 and 2019. Everywhere I travelled on train, on planes, I was stitching words I could hear on fragments of cloth. And then these were being put together into these pieces. And this piece is still in transition, which is how it should be, I think, at the moment. It's called the shipping forecast. It's in transition because I feel I'm still in transition. I'm not certain I'm just as nervous coming out of lockdown as angry and frustrated I was about having to go into it. I'm not certain where I'm going. I'm not certain how I'm going to respond to being with people again. But this is a time that I've been writing about. It's a time that I've learned that I can do other things, like being recorded for a future project. It does look like a very big studio space. In fact, it's 6 feet wide. It's wonderful what you can do with the camera, isn't it? And hanging things from the ceiling. So there's me standing, just to give you a sense of what it's like to have 5 lights, 3 cameras and 6 mics on you all at once. And I think my face is kind of saying, am I quite prepared for all of this? And indeed I was, without the cameras. So the materials are gathered around me, waiting for the time through the auditioning process that they begin to make sense to me. There's a cup of tea, never long without my cup of tea beside me. And the bags on the left, see my embroidery basket here, but this little bag here, little clutch bag and this folding bag are the only tools I carry with me when I'm teaching, when I travel. I gather everything else as I work. So this is what I've been working on during lockdown. I wasn't intending to write or have anything out for at least another 4 or 5 years, but it felt like the right thing to do. This is Embroidering the Everyday. I was commissioned to do this by Batsford Publication, a fabulous company to work with. They gave me the space to write and also gave me permission that if I wasn't going to be ready for print this year, we could wait till next year. It was the hardest thing I think I've ever done in my life. I think anybody who writes, you put your heart into your writing. And I know that my colleagues who've worked with the Batsford Press have produced amazing publications. As a visual artist who writes, I think it's important about finding my tribe, who I connect to, what it says about us as artists. And in the last year, it has been the things of the everyday that have sustained me and nurtured me. And these are some of my other publications that you may be familiar with. Much of what I can see, you can see here, is visible on my website. But do please look at textile artists. There are incredible artists represented there, from Shelley Rhodes, Sandra Meach, so many other artists, visual artists who work with textiles, whose voices are getting stronger and stronger during this time.